Welcome to the Mindful Miri podcast. This is about real women, bodies, and their evolution. We challenge conventional paradigms about what it means to be a woman, have a body, and live unapologetically. I have the great pleasure of introducing Shelly Tygielski. She's a mindfulness teacher, community organizer, philanthropist, author, self-care advocate, public speaker, former corporate executive, mother, wife, sister, daughter, friend, skater girl, mind ninja. After spending 20 years in corporate America, immersed in Fortune 1000 organizations and holding executive positions leading public and privately held companies, Shelly decided to stop following the expected path and start following her lifelong passion, mindfulness and meditation, and began to fuse this passion with her purpose, community organization, and ensuring equity, social justice, and access to well-being for all. And she recently got into a doctoral program in philanthropic leadership. Is that correct? Congratulations. So welcome to the show, Shelly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's such an honor. I first saw you speak at Wisdom 2.0 last April, and I was hooked. I was like, I feel so connected. She's speaking right to me. We have a common background in the Jewish culture and growing up immigrant parents and just the striving and the expectations that come with that.
Yes.
And I grabbed your book and reached out and was so I laughed and cried from your book. And you go through you're pretty vulnerable in terms of your sharing about your medical issue and the divorce and how you used mindfulness, you returned to mindfulness and meditation and really changed your life.
hmm
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Um, yeah, I mean, the book really, was this exercise of um, helping to expose this like delamination process, this, exfoliation, this excavation, if you will, and then moving from this like lowest place, which many of us can relate to. We've been there. We've each been there at a point in our lives, or many points in our lives, where we're like, "This is awful. Like things can't get any worse." And there's an emergence from that. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I went through this really terrible time, and it's not the only time that I've gone through like a lot of stress in my life, but there was this convergence of just so much that was happening, being a relatively new mother, going through a turbulent end of marriage, um, just getting physically ill, and of course, just I'm sure as somebody who studies like the mind body connection, you totally understand that there's no coincidence in that. When things like that converge, it's not like they're isolated events. They may seem that way at the time, but it became really apparent to me that they were all really interconnected, and that changes had to be drastically made in my life in order to um, just be able to pick myself up and survive, and hope to ever get to a position where I could not just survive on a daily basis, but actually thrive as well. And mindfulness was really an anchor. As you said, I returned to mindfulness because I really, already had a meditation practice. I started meditating when I was in graduate school in the late 90s, and I was fortunate enough to meet Sharon Salzberg. And but life happens and you get busy and like, yeah, and then I got married and had a kid, and I sort of became this crisis meditator, which is the label that we tend to give to people who only when they're in crisis do they recognize, oh my God, I need to meditate. Things are so terrible. And then when things get better again, they sort of fall off the wagon again, right? So that was what my practice had become. And it wasn't until really this moment where I was completely felt very broken, right? Felt completely shattered, felt completely in a place where I had no other options available to me at that moment. That I remembered that I had the best possible option, the most portable option, the freest option available to me, which is essentially to turn inward.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been there where I dread going there, going to the mat, going to the cushion, and I still teach it, and I have to
Yeah,
practice what
yeah,
I preach, but
yeah,
I still
yeah.
dread and I'm looking for I keep looking for what is the obstacle, right? What do you think the obstacle is for you
Um, I
or
mean,
was?
I mean, my obstacle is always myself. Like just like my entire existence is an obstacle, to be honest with you. I think I was actually just talking to a friend of mine yesterday. I don't know what we were talking about, and I said, I'm really happy that like thought bubbles don't exist in real life because nobody would want to be my friend or talk to me, you know? So that's the obstacle. The obstacle is that like I have a very like just like in life, I always have like 17 projects and things going on. Like my mind is very chaotic, and I tend to like default to the like Larry David school of thought when I about like where my mind goes, and you're like, wow, why am I like, how did I even begin to go down this like slippery slope and think about this completely asinine thing that like I wouldn't even want to like verbalize or talk to about anybody. And like that's how crazy my mind is like. So yeah, that's the obstacle. The obstacle is like not getting trapped, knowing that I'm like, most mornings, um, reluctantly like, and almost I would say in some ways, sometimes even playfully, like curious about like what insane thing is going to come up in my mind today.
It's just like that. I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh that talked about the leaves in the stream, and you
Yeah.
just or the clouds in the sky, and you just
Yeah.
let them pass. You don't once you get attached to it, it's really difficult to release them.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Totally. It really is. It's so true. I mean, my obstacles, for most people, it's like, oh, it's time, it's discipline, but I, to be honest with you, that's never been my issue. Like that's something that I just have, I think it's just embedded in my DNA. Like, I'm really disciplined when it comes to specific things and very self-driven, very self-motivated. Um, but also very self-aware to a default, to a point where it becomes a problem. It's like very self-analytical. It's like just critical, and then it becomes critical, and then it leads to like tertiary and thoughts and secondary thoughts and all these other areas of your brain where you're like, make it stop.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that inner critic?
I use, of course, I use my core teacher Sharon's advice. Sharon calls her inner critic Lucy from Peanuts. And she imagines that Lucy is like just sitting there like with the 5 cents, therapy, free therapy, or 5-cent therapy, or whatever it is in the comic strip. And Lucy never has anything nice to say, right? She's always like super critical, especially of Charlie Brown. And so Lucy's in her brain, and she has this like name for her. Um, and she says, like at this point, like she's just been living with Lucy for so long that it's like, it's just you know? And so it's really a process of just, I think, befriending the critic, approaching naming the critic. Literally, you can name it anything. It doesn't have to be like a funny, like a personal name, like it could be anything. And just, being curious about it. And the other part of it is that also, like, I think it's about creating a balance. So I am very critical of myself. And what I realize is, rather than try to like suppress my criticism, because that's never going to go away, it's just who I am. I'm very critical of myself. I can counteract the criticism with a nice comment. So like when I do something really just clumsy, and then I say, "Oh, you're so stupid." Then I can immediately say to myself, "But I love you." Right? And that's also a practice that I learned from Sharon. Or at least try to say something that kind of counteracts that. So there's like a balance. So yeah, like that was a stupid thing to do. But of course, my brain automatically goes to, I'm stupid, not that was a stupid thing to do, right? So trying to change language is important. But if you sort of immediately default to saying something that really is like self-defining, trying to at least balance it.
Yeah, I love that strategy. Every time I'm, getting out of the shower or something and I have that, I see myself in the mirror and something pops in my head. I'm like, "Oh, I love that body because it birthed my son and it walks miles and miles." And like I try to undo all this programming, right? So, and Sharon Salzberg, very well-known mindfulness teacher, is she the one who came up with the buju?
She didn't come up with it. I mean, it existed long before her,
Okay.
because clearly, like, but it was definitely the first time I heard it from
Uh-huh.
her in the 90s. But I think bujus or jubus were like a thing since like the 60s, really. It depends where you want to put the modifier, but really that's been like a thing since the 60s, right? Because when you look, so interesting, there's a really great book, I don't know if you've ever read it, called Lotus in the Talmud,
Hmm.
something like that.
I think I've heard of it
Um,
actually. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like a book about how curious it is that like some crazy number of like our Western Buddhist teachers are Jewish here in the West. And so why is that? And like, what are the overlapping intersections and connections between Buddhism and Judaism, which we don't think of, and we definitely don't learn. And especially as somebody who was like born in Jerusalem, like, and grew up, in a very traditional Jewish family, like, even when you're in, very historic places, like when you're walking the streets of the old city of Jerusalem, like you're in the Armenian quarter, you're in the Christian quarter, you're in the Muslim quarter, you're in the Jewish quarter, but there's no Buddhist quarter. So you're like, what does Buddhism have anything to do with Judaism? And you don't realize that actually there's a lot of overlap in the contemplative practices. And certainly as you start sort of learning more about um, the Kabbalists. And I'm not talking about like Kabbalah today, like the Kabbalah Center. Like, I'm not, no knock on the Kabbalah Center, but like, that's very different than like Kabbalah that was practiced, like mysticism that was practiced in Efrat and other places in the northern part of the country. And so, but the rabbis there who used to practice Kabbalah, would basically be in essentially transcendental meditation for hours, days, weeks, and be in a trance to try to ascend. and to get to, a place of sort of clarity and just unity and balance, etc. So there is a lot of overlap when you start to sort of learn about the practices, especially of the Jewish mystics, and you look at all of the traditions in the Far East, and you realize that like there really is that overlap.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there are a large percentage of the Western Buddhist leaders are and meditation leaders are Jewish, and I have wondered why that is. I think there's also it's kind of a restricted sample because it's those Jews who have ventured into the US also. So there's something about that as pioneers or that adventurous, individualistic spirit.
Yeah.
Maybe not individualistic, I shouldn't say that. Um, but speaking of, individualism, collectivism, you've started an organization. Well, you have, I mean, years ago, during the pandemic, you started an organization called Pandemic of Love. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Pandemic of Love was actually the like it wasn't even called that actually at the beginning of the pandemic. It's just like a name that sort of stuck to it because of the hashtag. But um, Pandemic of Love, from like a very high level, and the way that we would describe it, is a global grassroots mutual aid organization. It's volunteer run. We're not a nonprofit. We're actually a nonprofit disruptor. Because we believe that there are a lot more efficient and effective ways to provide aid to people in need. And aid doesn't necessarily just mean money, but ways that are much more direct and that create a direct connection. So not just direct in terms of like, hey, let me, you know, pay this bill for you, let me buy these groceries for you, let me mow your lawn for you, but rather, how can we not remove the human being from the equation of philanthropy? And in many cases, that's essentially what's been done by the philanthropic industrial complex that we operate in, right? Because it's so easy to just write a check and get a tax deduction and send it into somewhere. You never know where it's going, who it's going to, how it affects the person. You don't necessarily, some organizations do this where they like at least send you like updates about like, hey, here's where your money went on a 50,000 foot level or on a 10,000 foot level. And a few of them also do it like on a personal level. They say like, your money went to help this specific person and this is what it did, right? But very, very few and far between. And I think it's not a knock on, nonprofits, but I would say that, there really does, we're in a time, I think, just in history where we're rethinking systems and we're rethinking the way that things operate in general. Whether it's, economically or societally or, and philanthropically in other ways. And so I think that what mutual aid organizations that have, by the way, been around for really since the dawn of humanity, but like have been called mutual aid since, the early 1800s, have just proven that there's potential for the way that mutual aid organizations arise and organize for them to really help to create a new shift in the way that society relates and people relate to one another. So Pandemic of Love basically started with just two simple forms, give help, get help. And the idea was just at a time of disconnection during the pandemic, how do we not remove the connection that's needed between people, but also get people what they need? And at the time, that was mostly financial, and obviously also that need for connection at the time of disconnection. So the model was that a person would fill out a form online that said, I need help paying my electric bill this month, for example. And a person would fill out a form that says, I can give help for this amount, or I'm willing to pay somebody's electric bill this month. And then our volunteers would vet the two entities, make sure that they're, kosher and good and real. And then we would connect the two people directly and step out of the way. And something really amazing happened as a result of that, is that, the donor, who usually was the person sort of driving the bus, would have the opportunity to walk a mile in a person's shoes that they otherwise never would have met. That may very well even be like within a few city blocks of their house, that just operates in a different neighborhood, in a different you know part of that community, and they just sort of would have continued to pass each other by. So it became a very eye-opening experience for a lot of donors. It also became a way for our donors, many of whom were needing connection, even if they weren't needing things that like are tangible, like food and Wi-Fi and other things that money can buy, but having the ability to not feel helpless at a time when many of us felt very helpless, especially at the beginning, feeling like, okay, at least I'm doing something for somebody in my community. And then also developing a friendship with somebody that you otherwise, again, likely never would have met, or would have passed you by and you would have just continued, walking, type of thing, was really an incredible byproduct of the organization. And so many people formed lifelong friendships. So many people were changed by the connections. And for the recipients, getting your light bill, for example, paid, it was great. It was definitely a relief for many people to have rent money and to be able to feed your kids and all that stuff. But for so many people in that position who were probably already struggling even before the pandemic started, right? To be able to hear the words from somebody, a good Samaritan, a perfect stranger, to be able to say, what do you need? How can I help? Is just startling. I think it really makes you feel very seen, and it makes you feel like you matter. And it makes you feel like, like you maybe it even restores your faith in humanity to some degree, because you feel you feel, or you felt invisible for so long. So it's a beautiful kind of symbiotic way for us to create these like safety nets and these communities of care that I think need to exist, not just in a time of crisis, but need to exist year round.
I love that. And you talk about that in your book about creating communities of care. And I've been talking to my friends about that kind of nonstop. um, because I feel like uh, we all kind of live in our own silo, and we're not meant to live this way. We were
Yeah.
raised in villages, our
Mm-hmm.
ancestors lived in villages and helped
Yeah.
each other out, and the women
Yeah.
all pooled their time and resources for childcare. And there's an expectation that you're going to get help from others and you're going to help others.
Right.
And I've been talking to my therapist about creating that kind of community. And it's interesting because the deprogramming that you have to do with the people within that community in order for them to ask for help
Mm-hmm.
is huge. You have to just keep reminding that
Yeah.
same group over and over. Um, and I belong
Yeah.
to, yeah. What's been your experience in tackling that?
I mean, I think in my personal experience, I feel like it's not as difficult to deprogram people when there's a there's no risk of that, when everybody's equally vulnerable. If everybody's like completely showing up and in my book I describe, and this was like before, I mean, there was internet, but it was like very slow. And there definitely was no like Google Drive or anything like that. So like we would just send like spreadsheets by email, like back and forth, and update them like a couple times a week. But the idea was that everybody had to put things on the spreadsheet. Like you were required to ask for things on the spreadsheet, and you were required to pick up things that you could do easily that were not like a stretch for you, and fill in the gaps for people who were asking for things on the spreadsheet, right? Like I need help shuttling my kids around, or I need somebody to help with dinner on Wednesday nights or something like that, right? So I think it's interesting, that you say that there's like this deprogramming. I'm not saying that we're not programmed, especially women, is because we have been programmed to be caretakers and not self-caretakers, but what I found is that if we are all committed as a group to showing up with radical vulnerability, it sets the stage for all of those conditionings to sort of get dropped, because you're no longer like, you don't even need to ask for help anymore. Like it's in a way like we're using technology, like it's so easy to text somebody something rather than say it to their face, which is why a lot of people like opt out to have difficult conversations and instead send an email or write a text right nowadays. But I kind of feel like on the flip side of that, like, okay, great. So it's so difficult to ask for help. So why can't we like baby step our way there? Why can't we use technology to our advantage in this case? And actually, it's much easier to like write down the things that you need than to like verbally be able to like get up in a group and say, hi, my name is Shelly and I'm inadequate, unable to like take care of everything on my plate. And this is what I need help with, Um, so instead, it's so much easier to go into a spreadsheet that is shared by so many other women that are in that community and look at the 27 other things that people have on the list and feel like, oh, I could do these 3 things. And then you no longer feel bad because it's like tit for tat. You feel like I'm both a contributor and I'm also somebody who needs something. And guess what? So does everybody else. You no longer feel like it's just you, you know?
Yeah, I love that. I'm in a community now. It's a women's networking group called Women Making Waves, and I am finding that, we're supporting each other in our businesses, and there is that reciprocity that I
Yeah.
you're talking about. I love it. And I think that the next step for us might be to formalize it a little bit more and say, because there are, I mean, I'm a newer member, but to ask for help about, website design, marketing, or something like, or just picking up my kid, something like there's always something that somebody can offer easily, and
Yeah,
something that I can offer easily, and just having a platform to trade
exactly.
is crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's so easy. It's like we do it with stuff. We figured out a way to do it with like Craigslist or like,
Right, right.
Free Cycle or all these other websites. And yet, like for some reason, there's like a blockage between like things that seem less tangible to us or intangibles, and those are the things that we really ultimately need help with the most.
The most. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you think you got your philanthropic tendency, or um, your interest in philanthropy?
Um, well, I think that first, like, I think we should define like what philanthropy is, because the way I define it is really steeped in, I think, a definition that, harkens back to, um, like organizers, in the 50s and 60s who look at, philanthropy, if you will, not just as or not as charity, but rather as, solidarity. So the for mutual aid, the sort of tagline for mutual aid is solidarity, not charity. And that for me is the whole concept that Dr. Martin Luther King talked about, about making sure that everybody has boots and not just telling people to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. Because if you don't have boots, like, you can't do that. So making sure that there's real equity in that, and there's access, and there's, the ability for people to actually pick themselves up. And so, my interest started at a really young age. And I talk about a little bit in the book about my experience, in junior high school when I was 11 or 12 years old, and just really starting to understand that one person can actually create a huge influence and make a change. And for me, it started out as like, going door to door with a girlfriend of mine who was the impetus for my sort of empowerment, if you will, in this space as an activist, or as somebody who like recognized, oh, wow, okay, I can rise up in solidarity with people, but also get other people interested in the same thing if I can like convince them that there's an issue here that needs to be changed. And so it started out with like, animal rights and Greenpeace and saving the planet, and starting, like going door to door to save the whales and boycotting, organizations or companies that were testing on animals. And then it evolved into bigger campaigns, like getting a recycling program started at our school, which was like a big deal. This was like in the late 80s, this wasn't like a thing where automatically, like, people didn't even know what recycling was. Like, it was like Earth Day had just started, so we were successful in doing that. And I realized that, oh, like, okay, you can like mobilize people, and if you provide them with information and get them emotionally charged about something and get them to actually get off their butts and like do something, about it, that's really cool. And I could be the person, I and you and everybody else can be that person that is charged up about something. And so it started for me at a really young age. And I think that on the other side of it as well, I will say that, my parents, and especially my mom, was always like the person who very much embodied the Jewish philosophy of like tikkun olam, repairing the world, and like starting with her community. Like, she was always volunteering, like not just at the synagogue, but like at the local food bank, or she would always volunteer at my school, and like she always showed up. And even though we didn't have like much when we first arrived at this country, and they didn't have much to give, the one thing that my mom was always able to give was like her time and her attention, and these skill sets that she had, to be able to like to help communities that needed something, right? And I think so for me, like philanthropy, when we just use the word today, the way that people normally define philanthropy is like, they think of like, when I say philanthropist, your mind automatically goes to like billionaires and foundations and family offices and people who like have, these large charitable orgs that give out a ton of money, and like, oh, that person's a philanthropist, but really, like, all of us are philanthropists or have the capacity to be a philanthropist, even if we have no money in the bank, because our worth isn't just defined, even though it's been told to us that it is defined in many cultures, that it's not just defined by how much money we have. That's not how wealth is defined. Our wealth can be many different things. And the beautiful thing about, what Pandemic of Love reaffirmed for me was that every single person on this planet, regardless of their socioeconomic status, has something that they need and something they can offer. And so that no matter how rich you are, or, how how, you know, you may be struggling, you still have something to offer to the world, right? So I think that we just need to redefine wealth so that we can redefine what philanthropy actually means in our culture.
Wow, I love that. I've been playing a lot with worthiness and wealth in my
Mm-hmm.
journaling, and there's a lot of I think imposter syndrome around,
Mm-hmm.
especially, women entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and not only are not only is the mindset so crucial to the business, but also for the service that you're giving.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
making it everyone has something to give, like you said, and we all have a
Yeah.
purpose, and you find your purpose on this planet to make some kind of positive impact. But if you don't feel worthy, then you're not able to share the wealth of what you know, what you have, what you care about, your passion, even if you think
Right.
about that as wealth.
Right.
Um, it's just an
Yeah.
interesting dynamic, how closely those two are tied, the wealth and the worthiness.
No, you're 100% right. But again, it's like, where does that stem from? You know, and how long have we been told that they're so interwoven and that they define
Mhm.
each other? And, I think that's where the conditioning needs to be undone,
Yeah.
you know?
Growing up in an Orthodox Jewish community, what kinds of messages were you given about, being a woman, being worthy, not worthy, appropriate, not appropriate?
Well, so first of all, as you know, so in Judaism in general, I mean, there's many different ways to be a Jew, of course, right? And there's many different affiliations, like especially um, even more so here in the United States, like Reform, Orthodox, Conservative. Then there's like in between that, there's like dozens of other types, of groups or groupings or beliefs or what have you. But generally speaking, you're either a Sephardic Jew or you're an Ashkenazi Jew. And if you're a Sephardic Jew, which I am, your family doesn't come from Eastern Europe or from Russia or Western Europe, even for that matter. Your family comes from, Africa, Northeast Africa, from the Middle East. And so, for a lot of my friends growing up who, like most of the people that I grew up with were Ashkenazi Jews. So, um, they were very I don't know if it's always intrigued, but also confused by like just Sephardic traditions in general, especially if like you didn't grow up with Sephardi Jews. You're kind of like, what? You guys do what? Because there are like a lot of differences in culture and like the way that rules are followed, etc. So, like I remember growing up, like I would go to bar and bat mitzvahs for my friends. And first of all, girls were bat mitzvahed, like most of my girlfriends, growing up were bat mitzvahed and would get to hold the Torah and like stand at the bima with their family. And like I would go to the conservative synagogue or the reform synagogue and everybody would be sitting together. And then when it came time for me to quote unquote be bat mitzvah, my parents were like, what are you talking about? We don't do bat mitzvahs. Like, you know, girls are not supposed to hold the Torah. Like,
Right.
what? So I was like, well, can I at least have a party? Because like I just want to party like my friends. So my parents were like, yeah, sure, whatever, we'll throw you a party. So I did have a bar mitzvah party, but like I never actually had a service because my parents were like just in our Sephardic kind of upbringing and belief system, right? And again, I'm not speaking for all Sephardi Jews because I don't know what all the different types of Sephardi Jews, but just all the types of Sephardi communities that I've encountered, like the girl doesn't ever go to the, to the bima, which is like the altar. They never get to like hold the Torah, touch the Torah. Like it's just no, absolutely not. It's like a men's thing. And women are always sitting, not even in a separation, like a mechitza that's like 50-50, where like the altar is like in the center, but they're like women in the back.
Yeah.
Or if like it's a fancy synagogue, they're all the way on top, like 3 stories above and looking
Yep.
down. But like, at the synagogue where we attended services growing up, like the mechitza was like the women were all the way in the back, and like the wall that was built was so high that like you literally were peeking through like peepholes to like even see what was going on. And I was like, what kind of, that always felt like just so wrong to me. And it wasn't until I decided to try to go to seminary in Israel, in Jerusalem, it was kind of like, okay, I'm gonna see, like, I need to like delve deeper into my Judaism and try to like understand all of it, like what I wasn't being taught as a woman in a Sephardi culture, in a household where I was just told, like, where I would ask a lot of questions because that's who I am, like super inquisitive, and like I would be told like that's what we do because that's what our parents did and that's what their parents did. And like my mom, bless her soul, but like even going to Hebrew school, like I would be taught like kind of womanly things, like how to run a household, like I wouldn't be taught like things that like I was super interested in maybe knowing more about, right? Like that are like more about like text or scriptures or things like that. Because like, what do you need to know that for? Like, you don't need to know that. You just need to know how to keep a kosher kitchen, things like that. So I decided, I'm going to go and try to like obtain this knowledge from an Ashkenazi like culture. And I went to a seminary for all girls when I was, just like in my last year of college. And on day one, I asked if I could study Talmud, which is oral Torah for people who are listening that don't know what that is. Oral, but written down, basically. And I was told, no, absolutely not. You can't. First of all, you're a woman. And second of all, you have to first study all these other things. And then you can maybe, like with permission, you can, kind of graduate to that. And I said, but I don't understand, because I had a friend at the time, a friend of mine, who also like was in seminary, but like literally came from a very reform household, like really like never went to Hebrew school, didn't even know how to really read Hebrew. And he went to a yeshiva for the summer in Israel, in Jerusalem, and was given a Talmud like on the very first day that he arrived. So I was like, but that makes no sense. So that's kind of like where it started to all go down. I mean, really it started to go downhill for me, where I was like, wait a minute, hold on. And then, ultimately, I was actually asked politely, or I was told, I was not told to leave. I was told this may not be the right place for you. Because I would always question the rabbi like publicly when he was giving a lecture about like specific things that just didn't make sense in my brain. And so I wound up leaving seminary and going to study with a rabbi who taught at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, an American rabbi, Rabbi Schindler. And he was a Talmudic scholar, but like not like a rabbi Talmudic scholar. Like he was a Talmudic scholar, like with like a PhD in like biblical studies, like from like a university, like not from a yeshiva type of thing. And and also ordained as a rabbi. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. You want to learn Talmud? Like, let's go, and like, it was so interesting to me, just to kind of like experience that. Um, I feel like, in a way, this is a long-winded answer to your question, but I think, in a way, like, having all of these obstacles put in front of me, these walls that were built, if you will, I think being told that as a woman, I wasn't allowed to do certain things, or like watching my brothers be allowed to do certain things, but not being allowed to do certain things. I think it actually, in the end, not, of course, it annoyed me, but it also, like, I think eventually just like really became the fuel of like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. You'll tell me I can't do it. I'm going to do it. Like, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to prove that I can do it, or I'm going to find a way to do it. I'm going to find a loophole or whatever it was. And I actually think that it wound up providing me like with a lot of fuel, being kind of like poo-pooed and told that, like, oh, but you're just a girl. You're just a woman. Like, you can't do that.
Yeah, it's interesting what adversity can like the level of passion that adversity can fuel in us or kindle in us, sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, I had I grew up not Orthodox. My parents are both from communist Soviet Union, former communist Soviet Union, so very secular. Um, and my my dad actually got permission first to come to the States, and the Hasidic community embraced him.
Hmm.
And so when he went for my mom, he had like the full-on payas and everything. Like coming from I mean
Wow.
his family was more like practicing underground in Ukraine, but
Mm-hmm.
not but still not hardcore by any means, but he came in. And my mom knows, like, I love my mom, but knows nothing about Judaism, like very, very little. She doesn't even know the prayers. Like she doesn't know the motzi, like very, has not had a Jewish education at all. And so that was a quick change. But I think that some of those patriarchal messages are
Yeah.
still we're still very much there, and even coming from communist Russia, where it's like
Mm.
egalitarianism, like you're a comrade, she's a comrade, everybody's you know what I mean? Like there was still very much like the woman is in the house. She works now. She also works all day. She still takes care of the kids, right? And does all the dishes and does all the laundry and everything else. But she goes to work all day. And she serves her man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is not allowed to do things. She needs to be a martyr, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I've had like conversations, obviously, like since all in the last several years.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of like rabbis who are like, and rebbitzins, women who are married to rabbis who like seem like the women seem perfectly content, I should say, with this lot that they have in life. And and that to me has always been, I've been, at first, I will tell you that, many years ago, it was like I held this, probably this resentment, or this kind of like, what are you, nuts? Like, it's because you don't know what's on the other side, type of thing. And now I approach it completely differently, where it's like with this like sense of curiosity, and like, you know, maybe they are like, holding the possibility that, like, yeah, maybe they are content. Maybe like they would choose this route, and many of them did have a choice. Some people, like, like kind of like return to becoming like very orthodox, and they knew what life was like before. And some people need that rigidity, and they want, to sort of have things very like structured and, you know, um, hierarchical, etc. And but it I think having had to break out from that always made me feel like I wanted to go out and like save everybody else that was in that situation, like blink twice if you need help, like I'll come save you. But and it took me a while to finally realize that, like, no, like some people are very happy living this life, like, and that's okay too. Like everybody's got their own path to happiness or contentment or fulfillment in life, and that's just not mine, you know?
I will always remember from that movie Mona Lisa Smile,
Mm,
where have you seen that? No? Um, well, there's a part where one of the girls gets into Yale law, and it's set in the 1960s, I think. She gets into Yale law, and Julia Roberts, runs up and she's like, "Oh my gosh, how exciting!" And the girl says, I can't remember the actress's name, but she says, that's wonderful. I'm always going to have that, but that's not. I mean, part of feminism is the
mm-hmm,
choice, and I want
mm-hmm,
to choose to be a full-time mother
hmm,
and not go this other route,
hmm.
Um, and it took me a while to sort of not be judgy about that,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah.
It's it all comes down to your own values, whether your values are, this is my calling is to be a mother, my calling is to make an impact in a different way, my calling is to work outside the home, you know,
Yeah.
the it really is about choice.
Right. That's a really good point. I think that is exactly it. I think for me it's about like free will and agency and like don't push things down my throat. But like if somebody chooses to live this life, like really fully chooses to live this life, then Godspeed, like, be well. Like have a great life. May not be for me, but like, so um but just don't like push it onto other people or push it onto me or tell me that this is the way that it has to be. You know what I mean?
Totally. How are you on time? Are you okay for
Yeah,
another 15 minutes maybe?
sure.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Um, I wanted to ask you about, a lot of what my clients are struggling with is feeling ashamed of their bodies
Mm-hmm.
and or feeling like they're in, the body will not comply. Um, Especially coming from an Orthodox Sephardi, upbringing. What kinds of things, I mean, did you have an awareness about your body, about modesty, right? And kind of how did you evolve as you got older and your beliefs changed and things like that?
So interesting. Like um, yeah, I mean, like modesty was always like obviously a big, very big thing, but I don't feel like I ever had like issues with body positivity or like just body dysmorphia or whatever, like growing up, because I guess genetically I was fortunate enough to be like always like a small person, like just skinny and like not too skinny, but like just okay, like the type of kid that could like eat whatever they wanted and like was short and like just small in stature, like always the last person in line in the photo line, in the front row there to take a picture with the class. Um, but it's interesting to me because I've actually struggled more with it recently. Um, being perimenopausal, like you hit your 40s, your whole metabolism changes. So going from a person who like could be, yes, I've always been an active person, but like going from a person who's been active but could eat whatever the heck I wanted my entire life and not like really worry about gaining weight to suddenly kind of like especially I think with the onset of like the pandemic and like just moving less, you know, when things were shut down, and like just kind of getting out of your routine and your habit and the stress levels. So your cortisol levels are up and blah, 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 and being perimenopausal and everything else. Like I have never felt worse about myself than I had in the last, like, I will say, you know, probably 2 years, from 2000 to like this past summer. I was in Grenada this past summer, and I'm a person who like grew up, you know, in South Florida, like went to the beach all the time, like literally like, you know, most of my adult life, at least, you know, since being a mom, has been, much of it has been lived in a bathing suit, you know, in a pool in Florida or like on the beach or somewhere. And this summer, when I was in Grenada for 4 months, in the island of Grenada in the Caribbean, I felt completely unhappy with myself. I will go so far as to say felt completely disgusted with myself, like didn't even want to look in the mirror. Very harsh words, right? Um, and then when I got back to the US in September, I had to go for my physical, my annual physical. And again, never been the type of person that ever weighed myself. And I got on the scale and the doctor told, you know, oh, this is how much you weigh. And I was like, what? And I just like, to me, like I literally hit the wall in that moment. And, you know, it took me a while to like work through this mentally. I will tell you, I've come out on the other side of it now. Like I'm definitely, again, hyper self-aware, like working through it, but like, and approaching it with a curiosity, trying to not add judgment to like what I am feeling. But I was like, you know, it's like you have to move from a place of like feeling like shame, feeling anger, feeling maybe even like ambiguous loss to a certain degree. You know, there's like a grief there of like, especially if you like had something and then you lost it, you know, like I could fit into these jeans and now I can't, whatever. um but like I was able to sort of like, you know, get to a place where, not just from a logical perspective, I think a lot of us are logical, right? I could say to myself logically, like, it's a privilege to grow old. It's a privilege to have this body and be able to do this and to do that and whatever. And like, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, sure, of course, logically it sounds great. But if you don't really believe what you're saying, you know, where is that getting you, right? And I have girlfriends who unfortunately are no longer with us because they had cancer, because, you know, just life happens and we lose friends along the way as we age and we get older. And so to think about it in that sense, of course, yes, it is absolutely a privilege that I'm here and that I'm relatively speaking healthy and et cetera, et cetera. So what if I'm 20 pounds heavier, you know? Um, but what I realized is that the kind of feeling, I sort of like started to dig in a little bit deeper, and I tried to understand like, well, where is this really coming from? You know, I mean, where is this feeling of just being unhappy with myself coming from? And ultimately, you know, I think that it was that I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. And I also feel like it had a lot to do with that I didn't feel healthy, right? I felt like, is this a tipping point where it all goes downhill, or is there a way to get back to at least feeling healthy? And healthy doesn't necessarily mean that I'll ever be back to whatever I was when I was 30 or 35 or whatever. But like, for me, it was just like a realization that like, I need to be able to control what I can control. And if I have to come up with a new definition of what health means for me at this age and have some grace when I do it, then, you know, then that's what I need to work towards. And so, you know, I got myself an accountability buddy. And like my job is to send her on a daily basis, like a snapshot of whether I'm running or whatever activity that I'm doing to help get my body moving again. because for a while it kind of like came to, like I said, during the pandemic, I think for many of us, it just came to like a dead stop, you know? Um, and it required, I think, just like going back, and this takes our conversation full circle, but I think it requires sometimes hitting rock bottom, you know, in a way, like, or hitting a place where you're like feeling so bad about yourself, you know, how, whatever it is in your own skin physically, that you're like, I'm okay, now I'm ready to do something about this. And I think what I've learned in this process is just merely the act of moving my body and doing something, like actually investing in myself, and like makes me feel like, oh, like this body matters to me, you know, I matter, this body matters to me, like I am doing something, I'm like nurturing it, I'm taking care of it, like I've spent so many years taking care of my mind, and now it's time to also, you know, do the outer work too, not just like the inner brain work, you know? Um, so I think that, you know, that it's, look, it's an ebb and a flow, but I will say that it's hard. I totally empathize with the women that you work with. But again, as somebody who, I don't want to like be like, oh, I have it all figured out, whatever, you know, I'm going through it too. You know, I think as we age, we start to go through it, because in our minds, we think we look a certain way. And then we look in the mirror and we're like, ah, who is that? What happened? You know? Um, so I think just learning to laugh about it, and to sort of um take the compliments when you can, and also compliment yourself, you know, but also feel like, what can I control that is providing nourishment and love to my body today?
That's beautiful. Yeah. And what you can control, not only physically, but between your ears, right? You can't control all
Yeah,
those thoughts like we were talking about
right,
earlier, but if they're
right.
leaves in a stream, we can
Yes,
let them keep going and put
correct.
not put a dam up
Yeah,
or get
no,
attached. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But you know, it's, and then you start like, when you create that shift though, also mentally, and you're committed to like whatever it is, whether it's your diet issue, like you're eating
Mhm.
differently, or you're moving more, whatever it is that you decide, or you and your team of whoever you're working with decide that you want to do, like it's also exciting to see and to celebrate your wins, you know, versus just saying like, oh, but I still have this much more to go. And I think that like, once, for me at least, what was motivating was like starting to see the results of showing up for myself on a daily basis consistently, you know, um and not just like physically, but less mentally, like seeing, like really feeling the results, um and just thinking about like where I was mentally when I got on that scale at the end of September versus where I am today are two completely different places.
That's
Like I
awesome.
feel empowered now, like I feel like I am no longer just helpless. I feel like, okay, I've taken control back, like I could do this.
Even the smallest step helps with that. You
Yeah,
feel empowered, you're not helpless, and you feel like you're taking actionable
yes,
steps towards, what you want. So,
yeah. And that
and
goes
it's
back to the community, you know, like I think having an accountability partner is very important, because for me, it's harder to let other people down than it is to let myself down. So, you know, not wanting to let a certain person down is like just, yeah, it's crushing to me to think that I would let that person down. But like letting myself down, yeah, sure. You know, some days, sure.
I'm the same way. I think a lot of women are.
Right.
Going back to what you said about having, you don't have it all figured out. And like you, I mean, clearly you've always, you're articulate and okay, I'm not going to do too much. So, but you're articulate, you're brilliant, you know, very, very generous heart and mind. And you've always had that going, I imagine, throughout your life, high achiever. And there's always, you know, there's always room to grow. We're lifelong learners, and we have to come to each situation with a beginner's mind.
Yeah,
But you're a big fucking deal right now.
I am. Okay, you
In
say
my
so.
world, you are. And, you know, you've got a book out. You're a well-known speaker. But you're humble enough to say you don't always have everything figured out still.
I have nothing figured out. I don't know everything still. Like I literally am working through this. Like that's the thing. Nobody has everything figured out. Nobody has things figured out. You know, it's like it annoys me to no end when I like read books that are like the 7 steps to this and the 27 things to this. And it's like, you know, thank you, you know, would be, I think, better worded as like, here's a roadmap that I used and, you know, use it, but feel free to get off this path and like carve your own path. And, you know, this is what worked for me. Like, I just feel like we live in a world where it's not a conversation anymore. And so my whole promise to myself was, because I was crushed by like a few people that I, you know, when you like meet people that you really admire and then they turn out to be not who you think they are. So there's a lot of teachers that I had that, you know, I was like, you know, read their books, went to their, you know, retreats or like workshops or whatever. And like, and they just turned out to not be the people that I thought they were, or like they put on this like air of like who they were, like they had it all figured out. And then like when you actually really got to know them, you realize how messed up they really were, and like that they literally had nothing figured out or like not a lot figured out. And I just realized like I never want to present in that way. I never want to present in a way that somebody looks at me and goes like, oh my God, like she's, you know, so that's why I'm correcting you before you even get to your question. Cause I'm like, I have nothing figured out. Like we're figuring it out together. And I always want to talk about the mistakes I make and the struggles I'm having, because I want to encourage people to be able to do the same. And I never want people to look at me and say like, oh, this is my teacher and she went through all this and she's got it, like she's, you know, I have to do all these things to be able to get to this place. And it's like, no, we're walking together. Like, you know, we're walking together. And sometimes you'll be a few steps ahead of me and sometimes I'll be leading the way and sometimes you'll be leading the way. But like this idea that like we can't all learn from each other is just I think just limiting us in this wellness space that we operate in.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I was going to ask, you know, how you deal with the pressure of being a leader, but it sounds like you don't really consider yourself a leader, maybe, or
Yeah, I think I'm not going to say that I don't usually like try to take the helm and lead, but I also think I'm a very good, like I am also a team player. So I want to,
Mhm.
like, even when I was running companies, like, yeah, sure, I was, you know, the VP or the president or whatever, but like I would empower people to make decisions, to be leaders as well. And I would step out of the way, you know, and recognize like I need to hire people who are way smarter than me or who are experts in this specific thing that I know nothing about or I don't know as much as they know, you know? And so I don't, the pressure I have has nothing to do with producing things. It has to do with, or like keeping up an image or anything. It has to do with the pressure. There's two things. not letting people that I care about down. And so that's like a very big pressure that I feel a lot, because I am going to let people down. That's just the reality of it, right? I can't help everybody all the time, and I try, but it's hard. And then not coming to the end of like my days feeling like I squandered time in a way that didn't contribute to my overall sort of purpose in life. You know, so I'm not saying that I have to, again, be productive in every single moment, because doing nothing is doing something, right? And like it feeds my soul. And like I talk about it, you know, as a framing it as self-care. Going out today, you know, I went cross country skiing in the morning, like taking that hour to myself, like in nature, and, you know, is very meditative and like sort of recenters me and helps me to renew my commitment to doing the work and working, you know, for other people. But I think like feeling like if I'm not continuously like leveling up, to me feels like I'm going backwards. So if I'm not continuously in the pursuit of learning more, wanting to do more, expanding myself, you know, emulating the universe, constant expansion, then what am I even here for on this planet? That's the pressure.
That's a great place to come full circle on expansiveness and self-care. What does, let's see. I usually ask the question, what does body freedom mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I will ask you that question because
Okay.
especially with your medical stuff
Yeah.
going on. So, in my community, we talk about body freedom as feeling light, healthy,
Mm-hmm.
confident, liberated, resilient, being able to walk around in a burlap sack and strut your stuff. What does body freedom look like or mean to you?
I think body freedom for me at this point in my life means number one, feeling comfortable in my own skin.
Mhm.
Um, being free from my own judgments about my body. I'm not even talking about judgment from other people. Like I haven't even gotten there yet, you know, because it's so loud in here. And being able to physically maintain um the level of like activity that I enjoy um in the, you know, sports that I partake in and activities that I partake in, etc. Without restriction, without feeling like I can't do it.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank
Shelly,
you.
thank you so much for your time and your candor. And you have a new book coming out.
Hmm.
It's called, remind me what it's called.
How We Ended Racism,
Okay.
Realizing a New Possibility in One Generation. And I've co-authored it with Justin Michael Williams, and it's coming out October 2023. So keep
Woo!
an eye out for it. Yeah.
Wonderful. You can join a mailing list, right? To get on the.
Yeah, definitely. People can find me on my website. They can also go to my Instagram, which is where I'm most active,
Hmm.
which is Mindful Skater Girl. That's my handle.
Hmm.
Um, and there's the link in the bio will take you straight to my website or take you straight to the book that currently exists or allow you to sign up for my newsletter.
Beautiful. So the current book is Sit Down to Rise Up: How Radical Self-Care Can Change the World. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. I'll have a link to Pandemic of Love, the new book, and Shelly's website and all of her Instagram, I'm sorry, social media stuff.
Yeah,
Awesome. Shelly, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for opening your heart to us.
thank you.
And, if we reach just one woman with this podcast and make her life 5% better, then we've done our jobs.
Definitely. Definitely. Thanks, Miri.
Thank you. Thanks again for listening today to the Mindful Miri podcast. Our music today is from Elephantricity. I'm your host, Miriam Berlikowski, and my mission is to empower 1 million women to feel amazing in their bodies. If you like today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you get access to every episode as soon as it drops. As a special gift for podcast listeners, go to mindfulmiri.com and sign up for a 1-to-1 free consultation. Listen again next week and stay light, healthy, confident, and free. Welcome to the Mindful Miri podcast. This is about real women, bodies, and their evolution. We challenge conventional paradigms about what it means to be a woman. Have a pleasure of introducing Shelly Tygielski.